January 26, 1968. Heavy rain pours as 19-year-old Linda Slauson knocks on doors in Portland, Oregon, trying to sell encyclopedias to make enough money to pay her rent, buy some groceries, and maybe even treat herself to a new dress if she's lucky. But due to the heavy rain, combined with a bitter cold wind, nobody is keen to hear her out. Door after door closes in her face without a sale. Even though she has a pre-booked appointment with a man interested in making a purchase, she's about to call it quits before making it to his house, fed up with the miserable weather. But then, the rain finally stops, so she continues walking over to the neighborhood. As she gets close, she pulls out a note with the address on it, but the ink has been smudged by the rain, making it unreadable. Then she looks up to see a man standing outside his house, beaming a smile at her. Assuming he must be her client, Linda smiles back and approaches him, hoping she's about to finally make a sale. As the man ushers her inside, she's certain that he was the one who had made the appointment with her. But as she tries to talk to him about the encyclopedias, he tells her there are guests upstairs, and that they should head into the basement workshop where they can talk without being interrupted. Although Linda hesitates, the man's calm demeanor pushes away any doubts or worries from her mind. In the workshop, Linda sits down on a stool and begins giving him her best sales pitch, but almost immediately, he tells her he's keen to make a purchase. As she's overcome with relief at finally having made a sale, the man gets up and walks around her to switch an extra light on. But then, suddenly, he strikes her hard in the back of the head with a piece of wood, knocking her unconscious. As Linda collapses onto the floor, he leers over her, checking her pulse to find that she's still alive. So he places his hands around her neck and strangles her until she stops breathing. Because this man is not the person she had an appointment with. Instead, she has just walked into the home of Jerome Jerry Brudos, a disturbed monster who has just taken his first steps to becoming a serial killer. With Linda now dead on his basement floor, Jerry is overwhelmed by the idea that he has just done something he's fantasized about for almost his entire life. And Jerry has no intention for it to be over so quickly. He doesn't try and hide the body like most killers. Instead, he stands over it, contemplating what he wants to do with it next. Remaining calm and collected, Jerry heads back into the main house where the guests he told Linda are, who are actually his family, interacting with them as if nothing unusual has happened. Wanting to get them out of the way, he gives his mother some money and tells her to take his family out to go and get dinner. Alone in the basement workshop with Linda's body, he begins undressing her, savoring the moment so much that he is later able to recall every tiny detail about the clothing she's wearing. But then, there's a knock at the door. Frustrated by the interruption, Jerry answers to see a friend, forcing him to smile and engage in small talk until he can finally convince him to leave. Returning to the workshop, he then retrieves items of clothing from his own collection, stolen from various women over a number of years, and starts dressing her in them, posing her body like a doll while he engages in disturbing acts with it. This is his twisted fantasy. But the thing Jerry is most obsessed with isn't murder itself. It's shoes. And knowing he can't keep Linda's body in his basement workshop forever, he eventually uses a hacksaw to remove one of her feet, which he places in the back of the family freezer, strapped into one of his high-heel shoes. He then drives with the rest of the body to the Willamette River, where he ties it to part of a car engine to weigh it down, and shoves it over the railing at the Wilsonville Bridge into the dark water below. Back at home with his family unaware and continuing their daily lives, Jerry spends the following month sneaking off to spend hours with the frozen foot, posing it in different high-heeled shoes from his collection, taking photographs to capture the moments forever. After January 26th, when nobody had seen or heard from Linda, her family pleaded desperately with the police, but they were never able to find any sign of her or what had happened to her. Her employers didn't even have a clear record of where she'd been that day, making it almost impossible to trace her last steps. Even though her car was eventually found abandoned, it showed no indication of a struggle, and nothing had been stolen, offering investigators no clues. So with no leads, days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and soon her case turned cold like so many others before it. When it became clear to Jerry that he had gotten away with it, and that nobody was looking for him, or even knew she had been killed, he set his sights on finding another victim. Because the satisfaction he had felt from killing her, from posing her body and her foot in other women's stolen clothes, was fleeting. And he was desperate to feel that rush again. Driven by obsessive, violent urges and an unrelenting fetish that had dominated his mind since childhood, Jerry would go on to become a key part of John Douglas and the FBI's work in criminal profiling, interviewing him as part of their mission to understand the minds of serial killers. Because while Linda's murder was the first committed by Jerry, it was not the last. And it wasn't until the following year, when more young women began disappearing, that the mystery of what had happened to her would finally be revealed. This is the story of Towards the end of the year, on November 26, 1986, 23-year-old Jan Whitney vanished while she was driving home for Thanksgiving. Her car was later found parked at a rest stop near the Santiam Pass, east of Interstate 5. But much like Linda's car, there were no signs of foul play or any sort of conflict. The car was locked, and nothing had been stolen, though it did have a minor mechanical issue. While the case was reminiscent of Linda's vanishing, investigators didn't initially connect them to one another. Instead, they theorized that the mechanical issue might have forced her to seek help, potentially leading to her being picked up by someone offering a ride who had sinister intentions. Unfortunately, this theory was correct. Jan had been with two male hitchhikers she had given a ride to when her car broke down on Interstate 5 between Salem and Albany. And the person who stopped to offer them help was none other than Jerry Brudos. Maintaining his calm, disarming demeanor, Jerry inspected the car, claiming he would be able to fix it, but needed to get tools from his home. So the three of them got into his car, with the two hitchhikers being dropped off at their destination on the way. Having recently moved to a house in Salem, he drove her there and told her to wait in the car while he went to get the tools. Telling his wife he needed to go help someone with a car, Jerry returned to the vehicle, challenging Jan to tie her shoes with her eyes closed. When Jan attempted the task, he slipped a leather strap around her neck, strangling her until she lost consciousness and stopped breathing. With Jan now dead in his car, he violated her body right there, before carrying it into his new garage workshop. There, just like with Linda, he stripped her body and began redressing her in his collection of stolen women's clothing, this time taking photographs of everything. His fixation on high-heeled shoes was at the forefront, slipping different pairs onto her feet as he snapped away with his camera. Despite his wife and two children being only a few feet away in the house, he repeatedly assaulted her body throughout his twisted ritual. Then, he used a hook and pulley system he had installed to hoist her up into the air, leaving her suspended, though it might seem like he was being far too casual about having a dead body in his workshop. He had made it clear to his wife that she was never allowed to enter it without his permission, having installed an intercom for her to contact him from the house if she needed him. In his workshop, Jerry had total privacy to indulge his dark fantasies. While previously he'd removed a foot to keep as a trophy, this time he cut off one of Jan's breasts, which he tried to make a plastic mold of to use as a paperweight. However, when it didn't turn out how he'd hoped, he instead filled it with sawdust and pinned it to a board in the garage. That same Thanksgiving, Jerry had promised his family they would go on a getaway together. Shockingly, when he left with them, Jan's dead body was still hanging from the rope in his workshop. But while the family was away, a car unexpectedly crashed into the house, hitting the garage. When police arrived at the scene, an officer shined a flashlight into it, but failed to notice Jan's hanging body among the dust and debris. Had the officer looked a little longer and a little closer, many more lives could have been saved. Returning home and realizing how close he had been to being caught, Jerry took Jan's body to the Willamette River alongside Linda's foot, which was now starting to decompose, where he attached them to another car part and pushed them into the water. 4 months later, on March 27, 1969, another woman, 19-year-old Karen Prinker, vanished. A chemistry student at Oregon State University, Karen had come home and had plans to meet up with her mother for lunch in downtown Salem that day, but she never arrived. When her mother reported her missing, police managed to locate her car in the parking lot of the Meyer and Frank department store where she was supposed to meet her mother. But like the other vehicles found, it showed no signs of foul play and left them with no clues. However, a number of witnesses did actually see something. What they described as an unusually tall, odd-looking woman near the area the day she disappeared. With one of them stating that up close, it was clear that it was a man dressed in women's clothing. Though this tip meant very little at the time, it would ultimately become a very important piece of the puzzle for investigators down the line. Once again, the reality of what had happened to Karen was beyond disturbing. Jerry had also been at the Meyer and Frank store that day, this time dressed in women's clothing from his collection, having parked his station wagon after he spotted a woman wearing a miniskirt and high heels he liked the look of. He followed this woman to the store, but then lost track of her. So he returned to his car in the parking garage, which is when he spotted Karen wearing a green sweater with a matching skirt and shoes, which, apparently, he didn't think was a good outfit choice. She was locking her car door and heading towards the store. At that moment, Jerry grabbed her by the shoulder, pointing a gun at her. Karen begged him not to kill her, offering to do anything he wanted, so he forced her into his car, promising he wouldn't hurt her, and drove her back to his garage. There, keeping her at gunpoint, he assaulted her on the floor. After, he forced her to pose in different pairs of underwear and items of clothing from his collection while he photographed her. When she asked to use the bathroom, he allowed her to do so, keeping the gun pointed at her the entire time so she wouldn't attempt to scream or escape. While Karen complied with his every demand, desperate not to be killed, she unfortunately had no idea that she was dealing with a serial killer, and that nothing she could have done or said would have changed his plans for her. Jerry wrapped a rope around her neck, using the same pulley system to lift her off the ground until she suffocated to death. Then, he continued abusing her body multiple times, before cutting off both of her breasts to make molds. Though once again, he failed to do it successfully. To stop her body from bleeding over his car, he placed a large bra on her and stuffed it with paper towels, before using his usual method to dispose of her body, attaching a car engine head to it to weigh it down, and tossing it into the Willamette River. Although he didn't know it yet, this method of disposing his victims would come back to haunt him. Less than a month later, on April 21st, 1968, 24-year-old Sharon Wood left her secretarial job in Portland to meet her estranged husband to finalize their divorce. As she headed down into the lower-level parking garage of Portland State University to find her car, Jerry approached her. Feeling uneasy, she tried to head back to an area where she thought some other people were. But before she could get far, Jerry tapped her on the shoulder, causing her to turn and see his gun pointed at her. As with his previous victims, Jerry told her not to scream and that he wouldn't harm her if she followed his instructions. However, this time his tactic didn't work. Sharon knew her only chance to escape him, to save her life, was to act immediately, while someone might be nearby and able to help her. So she screamed as loudly as she could and tried to run. But Jerry grabbed her, wrapping his arm around her throat to try and silence her. But Sharon refused to stop screaming, to stop fighting. She kicked at him with her heels, grabbed at the gun with her hands, and bit down so hard into Jerry's hand that she drew blood. Shocked and likely panicked, Jerry tried to overpower her. But Sharon continued to fight with every ounce of strength she had, refusing to release her teeth from his hand. Eventually, Jerry managed to grab her hair and slam her head down into the concrete in an attempt to break free, dazing her and causing her to release him, but also causing him to drop the gun. At that exact moment, a car entered the garage and began approaching, so Jerry scooped up the gun and fled. While Sharon was too dazed to remember exactly what happened next, eventually the police arrived and she managed to give them a description of her attacker, calling him tall, blue-eyed, and freckled, and assuring them that he looked distinctive enough that she would definitely recognize him if she ever saw him again. Police canvassed everyone in the area, but nobody else was able to recall seeing anyone matching her description. While you'd think this encounter might have spooked Jerry and caused him to lay low for a bit, if anything, it appeared to have the opposite effect, as he struck again the very next day. This time, he attempted to kidnap a 15-year-old girl, Gloria Jean Smith, while she was walking near Parish Middle School in Salem, trying to force her into a green Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. Approaching her, he told her he wasn't going to assault her and not to be scared, placing a hand on her shoulder. But this was enough to spook Gloria for obvious reasons, causing her to brush him off and try and walk away from him. However, Jerry followed her, trying to talk her into coming with him as he walked beside her. Luckily, the young girl spotted a woman working on her lawn as they walked, and instantly yelled for help, bolting towards her and causing Jerry to flee. When police interviewed Gloria, she also told them that her attacker was a large, freckle-faced man, leading them to believe that the two attacks were likely connected. But despite investigating all known sex offenders who matched the description in the area, they found no solid leads. And unfortunately, this meant that Jerry was able to strike again the following day. On April 23rd, 22-year-old Linda Salee vanished after going to the Lloyd Center in Portland to buy a gift for her boyfriend. When she failed to meet up with him later that evening, and also failed to show up for work the next day, it seemed clear that something was wrong. Just like in the earlier cases, her car was found abandoned with no visible signs of a struggle or foul play. And once again, investigators had no evidence and no leads. However, having occurred right after the two failed abductions, this time they couldn't help but speculate that some of the other cases of missing women they had in the area from the last year might actually be connected. That they might be examples of successful abductions by the same suspect. If their freckle-faced suspect had succeeded in abducting Sharon, her car would have been left in a similar manner, locked and with no signs of foul play. So they began putting together a timeline of all the cases they knew about. All of them featured young white women who had vanished without a trace towards the end of the month. But if this freckle-faced man was really responsible for their disappearances, what had he done with their bodies? Sadly, they were correct about Linda Salee's fate, because she had just become the fourth victim of Jerry after he spotted her in the Lloyd Center parking garage where her car was found. Trying a different tactic after his last two failed abductions, Jerry approached her identifying himself as a police officer, telling her he was arresting her for shoplifting. Linda believed him and followed him to his car, where he pulled his gun on her, forced her inside, and told her she was being kidnapped for ransom. At his home, he tied Linda up and locked her in the garage workshop while he left to go and have dinner with his wife and family in the house. After they'd finished eating, he returned to his bound victim, assaulted her, and strangled her with a leather strap. Although Linda fought back and tried to stop him, Jerry was just too big for her to overpower. Once she had died, he carried out his sick routine of dressing and undressing her in items from his collection. Eventually, he hung her body by the neck from the same pulley system and inserted wires into her ribcage, electrocuting her in an attempt to make her dance. Though, as with all of his disturbing plans, it didn't work as he'd hoped. After assaulting her body and making a mold of her breasts, he drove her to the river, attached a car transmission to her body, and dumped her into the water. But then, on May 10th, within 3 weeks of Linda Salee's disappearance, everything changed when a fisherman, casting his line in a tributary of the Willamette River, made a shocking discovery that finally confirmed the investigators' worst fears. Arriving at the scene, police discovered the fisherman had found the bloated body of a woman, which had been tied to a car transmission with nylon rope using a distinctive knot. Alongside the knot, which police preserved in case it could help them identify a suspect later down the line, they discovered copper wiring used to bind her that had been twisted in a specific way, indicating the killer might be an electrician or someone with electrical experience. Conducting an autopsy, the medical examiner found damage around the neck that implied strangulation was the cause of death. And intriguingly, they also identified puncture wounds on either side of the ribcage surrounded by burn marks. As I'm sure you've already worked out, the body belonged to Linda Salee, which investigators soon confirmed using dental records. They now had an answer to what had happened to at least one of the missing women in the area. Assuming the killer might be responsible for more vanishings, detectives Jim Stovall and Gene Doherty were assigned to the case and continued searching the river for more bodies. And within days, underwater searchers discovered a second body less than 50 feet away from where Linda's had been found, though this one was substantially more decomposed. The body was also weighted down with a car part, tied using a nylon cord with a matching knot, and also showed signs of strangulation, making it clear they were dealing with a single murderer. The clothes still clinging to the body were found to match the outfit Karen Prinker had last been seen wearing, and soon the remains were confirmed to belong to her. Over Karen's chest they found the oversized bra Jerry had placed on her, stuffed with paper towels. The medical examiner would later confirm that both of Karen's breasts had been removed, with the paper towels having been used to soak up blood from the wounds. At that point, Detectives Stovall and Doherty and their team were certain the other missing women's bodies were going to be found in the river. But despite exhaustive searches, no other remains were located. Although they had 2 bodies now, and some potential clues as to who their killer might be, the investigators weren't able to discover anything that pointed them towards a suspect. Not only was this in the 60s, with far less advanced forensic techniques available to them, but the concept of a serial killer wasn't even established yet. While cases of killers murdering multiple victims were known, this was before Robert Ressler and the FBI had begun identifying and trying to profile what they would come to call serial killers. The Oregon detectives had simply never dealt with a case like this before. In an attempt to trace the origin of the auto parts, officers questioned workers at garages and junkyards throughout Western Oregon, believing their suspect might be a mechanic. But more importantly, they began questioning the families and friends of both victims. This led them to talk with classmates of Karen at the Oregon State University, where they learned a number of students had received phone calls recently from a strange man claiming to be a Vietnam vet looking to arrange a blind date. While most of them had hung up and ignored this man, one student, feeling pity for him, had agreed to go on a date with him. On the date, the student had become increasingly uncomfortable with him, especially after he casually brought up the discovery of the bodies in the river and even asked her if she was worried he was going to strangle her. These comments spooked her enough to not want to see him again. But it was her description of the man that really piqued the detective's interests. She claimed he had driven a dirty station wagon with kids' clothes inside, likely implying he was married, and that he was tall, had light reddish hair, and his face was covered in freckles. This description perfectly matched the descriptions from Sharon and Gloria of the man who had attempted to abduct them, which felt more than coincidental to the detectives. So Stovall and Doherty asked her to let them know immediately if he got in contact with her again, and luckily, he called her within days of them speaking to her. So she arranged to meet him on May 18th at their request, acting as if everything was normal. In reality, detectives and police officers were staking out the meeting spot, and after a while, the tall, freckled man matching their profile arrived. So they quickly approached him, learning that his name was Jerry Brudos. But as he'd done with his victims, Jerry remained calm and confident throughout their questioning, making it seem like he had nothing to hide. Although he gave them his real name and age, he provided them with a fake address. Unsure if Jerry was truly the man they were looking for, and with no legal reason to hold him, the detectives had no choice but to let him go. However, Detective Stovall and Doherty immediately began investigating him. Their background check revealed Jerry worked as an electrician and had a history of violence against women. Upon discovering his real address, they found that he had previously lived in the exact neighborhood where Linda Slauson had vanished while selling encyclopedias, and that his current home in Salem was alarmingly close to where Karen was last seen. While Jerry didn't own a Volkswagen Carmen Ghia, the car described by 15-year-old Gloria, they learned that his mother actually did, and that he had been driving the car on the day of her attempted abduction. So, showing his image to Gloria, she quickly confirmed that he was the freckle-faced man who had attacked her, giving them enough evidence to secure a search warrant for his property. On May 26th, they arrived at Jerry's home to issue the warrant, and it wasn't long before their suspicions about him were confirmed. In his workshop, they found his large collection of stolen women's clothes, including lingerie and countless high-heeled shoes. They also discovered the list of phone numbers for sorority houses and college dorms he had been using to call students to try and arrange dates. A coil of copper wire matching the type found on the bodies was discovered, as was a length of nylon rope tied using the exact same type of knot found on them. There were even engine parts scattered around the workshop, similar to those used to weigh the bodies down. But most shockingly, they uncovered numerous photos of young women who were both alive and dead, all clearly taken in the workshop. These included images they instantly identified of Karen, including pictures wearing nothing but high heels with an expression of fear on her face. One of the photos showing a woman's body hanging from the pulley system had been taken above a mirror and showed Jerry in the reflection holding the camera, confirming that he had been the one taking the photographs. Additionally, they found a severed breast coated in epoxy resting on a shelf, being used as a paperweight. There was no doubt whatsoever that Jerry was their killer, but to everyone around him, Jerry was a devoted family man who didn't even drink, smoke, or swear, who was happily married with 2 young children. He didn't seem like the sort of monster who could commit the horrific crimes it seemed clear that he was responsible for. But that's only because nobody knew who Jerry was. And to understand that, we need to take a step away from the investigation and go all the way back to the start. Jerry Brudos was born in Webster, South Dakota on January 31, 1939, to Henry and Eileen Brudos. At the time, his parents already had a son, Larry, and his mother desperately hoped to have a daughter. Her disappointment soon became clear and manifested as open hostility towards Jerry. While she poured love and praise onto his brother, she treated Jerry with disdain, neglecting and belittling him, and criticizing any and everything that he did. According to Jerry in later interviews, she even forced him to wear girls' clothing. Feeling rejected by his own mother, Jerry attached himself to other women in his life, including a neighbor he later claimed was so kind that he fantasized she was his true mother. Alongside her, he befriended a young girl living nearby, but she sadly passed away after battling with tuberculosis. At age 5, Jerry became fascinated by a pair of shiny high-heeled shoes he found at a local dump, bringing them home with him. However, when his mother found him wearing them in his bedroom, she instantly snatched them away from him, calling them wicked, and telling him to return them to the dump. When she discovered Jerry had disobeyed her and kept the shoes, she beat him severely before setting the shoes on fire in front of him. This singular moment created a long-lasting obsession with high-heeled shoes that would become pivotal in Jerry's later life. While it's unlikely the shoes themselves had any particular effect on him, the way his mother reacted almost certainly did. She made the high heels feel like something forbidden and off-limits. After this, his fascination with women's shoes evolved into a deep-seated fetish. It wasn't long before he was caught trying to steal his first-grade teacher's shoes from under her desk. And later, he tried to steal the shoes of a neighborhood girl while she was lying down in his house. When his family moved to Grants Pass, Oregon, Jerry began sneaking into their neighbor's house and trying on the clothes of their daughters, wearing not just their shoes but their underwear and bras. This led to his first instance of stealing women's clothes, which he hid in his room, beginning what would become his future collection. This strange obsession with forbidden female clothing only intensified as he reached puberty, and it quickly became interlinked with his understanding of sexuality and arousal. Although Jerry wanted to have sex, he was quiet and shy, and found that his height and severe acne made it difficult for him to talk to girls. Instead, he continued to build his collection, seizing any opportunity he could to steal shoes and underwear from neighboring houses and local girls, which he would wear and pleasure himself with in his room. According to Jerry, he was never able to ejaculate while doing this, though he regularly experienced wet dreams. Whenever his mother Eileen found his stained sheets, she would scold and punish him, before making him wash them himself, making the very concept of sex feel taboo and abnormal. Around this time, he also found himself becoming aroused by the idea of keeping a girl captive. It could be argued this stemmed from a desire to feel powerful and in control, given how he was treated at home by his mother. But whatever the reason, this fantasy became increasingly overwhelming for him, and by the time he was 17, Jerry no longer found that just stealing women's clothing or following them around the neighborhood would satisfy his urges. He wanted to see a real woman naked, and he wanted to exert control and dominance over them. He even dug a hole in a hillside where he planned to keep a woman as a sex slave, though it doesn't appear that he ever actually made that fantasy a reality. Instead, he spent countless hours in the hole himself, imagining what he would do if he trapped a woman in it with him. In 1955, Jerry finally came up with a plan to get what he wanted. After stealing an 18-year-old neighbor's clothing, he made up a story about how he could help her get them back, inviting her over to his house. That night, with his family out, the girl arrived, seeing Jerry as harmless, and knocked on the door. Jerry beckoned her inside, calling her upstairs. But after ascending the stairs, a masked figure holding a knife suddenly jumped out at her, pressing the blade to her throat. The masked figure demanded she take her clothes off or he'd kill her. With no choice, the girl did as she was instructed. But the masked figure didn't assault her. Instead, he removed a disposable camera and snapped pictures of her naked body. Finished, he rushed off. So the girl quickly put her clothes back on and moved down the stairs to leave. Just then, Jerry appeared asking if she was okay, claiming he had been locked in the barn by an attacker. While it's unlikely the girl believed his story, she ran back home and, seemingly, didn't tell anyone about it. Jerry faced no repercussions for what he'd done, so he developed the images and used them to satisfy his urges, savoring the rush he'd felt from exerting complete control over his victim. From then on, he developed a pattern of abducting girls around his own age at knife point, forcing them into the barn on his family farm, where he'd make them strip so he could take photographs of their naked bodies, occasionally keeping their shoes or underwear for his collection. Like his first attack, he would often make up an unbelievable-sounding story, such as claiming he had a twin who was responsible and suffered from mental health issues, pleading for his victim not to tell anybody about what his twin had done. After 8 months with no consequences, in April 1956, Jerry persuaded a 17-year-old girl to go on a date with him, driving her out to a deserted farmhouse. Once there, he began beating her until she bled after she refused to remove her clothes for him. In the middle of nowhere, nobody was able to hear her screams, but that didn't stop her fighting. desperate not to let him assault her. Fortunately, a young couple driving down the road spotted the attack and drove over to stop it. Confronting them, the girl's face was too bruised to tell them what had happened, and Jerry claimed he had just rescued her from an attacker. Not believing his story, they refused to leave without taking the girl to safety, so Jerry followed them back to their house, where they immediately called the Oregon State Police. Confronted by the police, Jerry eventually admitted to attacking the girl, claiming he was not going to assault her, and that he had just wanted to take photos of her naked. Because of this confession, and because her injuries were so extensive, including a broken nose, the police searched Jerry's bedroom, where they located his stash of stolen women's clothing and shoes, as well as the naked photographs he had taken of various young women. Able to identify one of the women, the police contacted her, and she told them about the ordeal she had suffered at the hands of Jerry's so-called twin brother. As a result, Jerry was arrested and sent to the psychiatric ward of the Oregon State Hospital for evaluation, where he was diagnosed with borderline schizophrenia, though he was still allowed to attend school while he was there. During therapy with various doctors and psychiatrists at the hospital, it became apparent that Jerry's sexual fantasies were centered around a desperate wish to take revenge on his mother for her demeaning attitude toward him in his formative years, leading to him wanting to seek revenge against women in general. Despite learning about his collection of stolen clothes and Jerry confessing to his bizarre fetishes, including fantasies of chopping up young women to rearrange their body parts inside a freezer, he only spent 9 months in the hospital before being deemed sane enough for release in 1957. Instead of seeing him as dangerous, the doctors there regarded him as being immature, and consequently struggling to deal appropriately with his emerging sexual urges. Because not much was known about the development of serial sexual predators and killers at the time, the doctors believed that he simply needed to grow up. Unfortunately, they couldn't have been more wrong. After leaving the hospital, Jerry finished high school and joined the U.S. Army, where he trained as a communications technician. There, he earned the rank of private second class, but it wasn't long before he was discharged due to what reports call his bizarre obsessions, although the precise details of exactly why he was discharged seem to be unclear. Settling back into his life, he found work as an electronics technician at a radio station, and returned to his parents' small 2-bedroom home in Corvallis, Oregon. During his time at their house, his mother continued to treat him with disdain. She briefly allowed him to sleep in the second bedroom while his brother was at college, but as soon as he returned, she forced Jerry to sleep in a shed outside. While staying in the shed, Jerry was involved in his first violent attack since his release. After following a young woman back to her Salem apartment, Jerry strangled her until she fell unconscious before stealing her shoes and fleeing. Shortly after, he attacked another woman wearing high-heeled shoes, though she managed to fight him off, resulting in him only being able to steal one of her shoes. According to his own account, he slept with the shoes in the shed, and he was never connected to these incidents. At the age of 22, Jerry met a shy 17-year-old girl called Darcy Metzler, although she is given different names in most sources, so it's likely her name has been changed to protect her identity. And initially, their relationship seemed to flourish, with Jerry making the typical romantic gestures such as buying her flowers and gifts. After marrying in 1961, the couple gave birth to their first child. With Jerry struggling to hold down steady employment, they frequently moved around the country before settling in Portland, Oregon, where he found work as an electrician. Although outwardly they looked like an ideal family to their neighbors, it wasn't long before Jerry started forcing his bizarre desires on his wife, such as requiring her to perform household chores while naked and wearing only high heels, which Jerry regularly took pictures of, even though it made her feel uncomfortable. Darcy, desperate to live up to the ideal of a proper 1960s housewife, tolerated his increasingly erratic sexual demands for a few years. However, when their daughter, Megan, became a toddler, Darcy no longer felt it was right for her to be walking around naked all the time. As their marriage became more and more troubled, Darcy began to realize that Jerry did not see her as a person, but as an object, a woman in high heels for him to lust over. So instead of conceding to his demands, she began completely refusing to have sex with him. This left Jerry feeling rejected and frustrated, and it wasn't long before he returned to his old habits to satisfy his urges. With no intimacy between them anymore, Jerry spent an increasing amount of time working on projects in his workshop, including fixing electronics in cars, while Darcy began spending more time socializing with her friends. According to Jerry, He started suffering from severe migraines and blackouts around this time after being electrocuted at work, which only seemed to go away when he started sneaking into homes and stealing women's underwear and shoes again, rebuilding his collection. Just like he had done in his childhood, he began wearing these clothes, even dressing in full drag, and pleasuring himself as he fondled them. Psychiatrists would later suggest that this was a coping mechanism of sorts, with Jerry reverting to his perverted fantasies to escape his troubled reality. Darcy never seemed to notice when her husband snuck out or stayed out late to invade other people's homes to steal clothes for his collection, though she did claim that at one point he walked up to her wearing women's underwear and seemed genuinely hurt that she was shocked and disgusted by it, rather than accepting of it, though the pair never actually spoke about the incident after it happened. Eventually, Darcy gave birth to their second child, with Jerry having been eagerly anticipating the arrival of their son. However, Darcy refused to allow him to be present during his birth, leaving him feeling deeply hurt. This emotional setback caused him to regress even further. Not long after, in May of 1967, Jerry followed a woman home after becoming fixated on her shoes. Once she'd fallen asleep, he entered her home and strangled her until she lost consciousness. This time, he crossed a new line, claiming the sight of her limp body aroused and excited him so much that he couldn't stop himself from assaulting her. After he was finished, he selected several pairs of her underwear and shoes and left with them. The following year, on January 26th, he spotted Linda Slauson while he was out working in his yard, luring her into his workshop under the guise of looking to buy encyclopedias from her. And on that day, he crossed another line, beginning his journey as the serial killer now known as the Shoe Fetish Slayer. When police had tried to serve the warrant to search Jerry's home, he had attempted to flee by hiding in the back of his station wagon under a blanket while his wife drove away. However, this plan immediately failed and he was quickly arrested. At the time of his arrest, he was wearing women's underwear. And although his lawyer advised him to stay silent, and Jerry initially denied knowing anything about the crimes he was accused of, it wasn't long before he began confessing to Detectives Stovall and Doherty. The detectives found that Jerry's confession was more like a brag, with him appearing to take great pleasure in discussing his fetishes and the horrific details of what he'd done, growing more animated as he spoke about the murder and mutilations, and showing no remorse or regret as he described every gruesome detail. He told them how he'd lured or abducted his 4 victims, how he'd strangled them in his workshops, how he'd dressed their bodies in various different items of clothing while engaging in sexual acts with them, how he'd taken photographs of them, both before and after their deaths, and how he'd mutilated them, such as preserving Linda's foot to model in different high-heeled shoes, and making casts of Karen's breasts. Despite the detectives only having found 2 bodies, Jerry openly confessed to killing 4 women between January 1968 and April 1969, as well as multiple attacks and assaults on other women. Much of what's known about what happened to his victims as detailed earlier comes from Jerry's own confession, which he freely gave over 3 days of interviews with the detectives. With his description of Jan Whitney's murder matching up to what they knew about her disappearance, alongside images in his collection being identified as containing her, Jerry was then formally charged with the murders of Jan, Linda Salee, and Karen Prinker. However, he wasn't charged with the murder of Linda Slauson, as beyond his confession, which did not include her name, they did not find any evidence to prove he had murdered her, and her body was never recovered. Jan's body, on the other hand, would eventually be found the following year, in the summer of 1970, close to where Jerry claimed he'd dumped it. The 2 detectives also confirmed his account of his attack in May of 1967, but the victim was not able to identify him when shown images, so they chose not to pursue additional charges for that case. Attorneys Dale Drake and George Roten were hired to defend Jerry, expecting the trial to be lengthy and complicated. Given the sheer amount of evidence against their client, they knew there was no way to deny his guilt. So instead, they pushed him to pursue a not guilty by reason of insanity plea. This led to Jerry undergoing multiple mental health evaluations by not only their own experts, but those of the prosecution as well. During these evaluations, Jerry was reported to fake tears as he tried to convince the experts that he had been a victim of his mother's cruelty and couldn't be held accountable for his actions. He made a number of excuses for what he'd done, such as claiming he suffered from blackouts after the alleged electrocution incident at work, which led to his violent behavior. But ultimately, the 7 psychiatrists for both the prosecution and the defense who evaluated him All agreed that while he had a personality disorder, he was not psychotic and was fully aware of what he was doing. They claimed that he suffered from antisocial personality disorder, but that he was legally sane and fully aware his crimes were wrong and illegal at the time he committed them. They also concluded that he could not achieve satisfaction from normal sexual intercourse, determining his primary motivation to be lust, and claiming that even in cases where the murders were opportunistic, he had always planned to kill his victims. Realizing his insanity defense was not going to work, with his lawyers telling him there was no way they could hope to win a trial, 2 days before his trial was set to begin, on June 27, 1969, Jerry entered a guilty plea for the 3 murders he was charged with. As a result, Marion County Circuit Judge Val Sloper sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms with the possibility of parole, and he was transferred to the Oregon State Penitentiary. After Jerry's arrest, one of his neighbors claimed to have seen his wife, Darcy, assisting him move a woman onto the property on the day Karen was abducted. Alongside her role in seemingly trying to help him flee, this led to her being arrested and tried as an accomplice in Karen's murder. In reality, I imagine it was difficult for investigators to believe that she could not have known what her husband was doing mere feet away from her, especially given it didn't even seem like he was attempting to be discreet in most of his account. Darcy admitted that she had once discovered one of the breast molds, but Jerry had explained to her that it was a paperweight and made it seem like she was overreacting. Similarly, she also once caught him developing photographs of a nude woman, but according to her, she had no idea they had been taken under duress, or that the woman in the images had been harmed. Jerry himself claimed that she had no knowledge of his crimes and had driven the car on the day of his arrest because he had forced her to. Ultimately, the witness account was contradicted by others during her trial in September, and with no other evidence against her, she was acquitted of all charges. By 1970, Darcy divorced Jerry, changed her name, and moved away with their children, who she gained full custody over with a court order prohibiting them from ever having contact with their father. While there has always been doubt about what Darcy did or didn't know, Anne Rule, in her comprehensive research into the case for her book Lust Killer, ultimately concluded that Darcy was also a victim, and likely struggled with the notion that she had seen multiple red flags linked to his crimes and had done nothing about it. By August of that year, Jerry filed for a rehearing in the Oregon Court of Appeals, claiming the court should not have accepted his guilty plea for 3 separate murders, and instead he should have been given 3 concurrent life sentences that all ran at the same time. As you can imagine, his appeal was denied, as were all of his many further appeals, one of which included a claim he had been suffering from low blood sugar when he entered his guilty plea, and so it wasn't valid. Throughout his years in prison, Jerry periodically received parole hearings, which always sparked a strong reaction from family members of the victims and Oregon residents, who all urged the parole board to deny his release. Ultimately, in 1995, the board decided that he would remain in prison for the rest of his life, refusing to buy his continued excuses about his mother's abuse, or claims that he no longer posed a threat. As far as they could tell, he had never shown remorse for his actions. Board Chairman Marva Fabian said to him at the hearing, "You will be in prison for the rest of your life, and there will be no further parole hearings." Despite this, he continued to have informal interviews with the parole board every 2 years, as was required by law. During an interview with former Marion County Detective Jim Burns, Jim asked if Jerry felt any remorse for his victims. In response, he picked up a piece of paper, crunched it into a ball, and threw it onto the floor, stating, "That much. I care about those girls as much as I care about that piece of wadded-up paper." While in prison, Jerry became infamous for keeping stacks of female shoe catalogs in his prison cell, which he used as a form of pornography. He even wrote to major shoe companies, requesting they send him their catalogs. He was also regularly beaten and attacked by other inmates in prison due to his status as a sex offender, including an incident in his first year of incarceration in which he was treated for rectal bleeding, which was officially noted as being caused by hemorrhoids or other. While in prison, Jerry earned 2 college degrees, one in general sciences and another in counseling, and began working towards a master's degree in counseling, though the idea that even a tiny part of him believed someone might want him as their future therapist truly baffles me. When Robert Ressler and John Douglas, 2 of the first FBI profilers who we have discussed many times on the channel before, began conducting interviews with serial killers to try and understand their minds and help them establish their future behavioral profiling unit, Jerry became one of the first serial killers they spoke to. At the time, the FBI was just beginning to study the psychology of serial killers, and Jerry was chosen as a poster boy for the phenomenon of lust murder, a crime that involved not only killing but also sexual torture. While Douglas claimed in his book Mindhunter, the inspiration for the Netflix series of the same name, which features elements of the interviews with Jerry in it, that Jerry was cooperative, in truth he often offered them very little information, in spite of the detailed confession he previously gave the detectives on his case. In those initial interviews, he described precise items of clothing his victims were wearing during different attacks and mutilations. Yet in talking with the FBI agents, he tried to downplay his actions and often claimed he couldn't remember specific details. He did, however, provide them with many details about his childhood, which is where most of the information covered earlier comes from. This in itself was extremely helpful for Douglas and Ressler, as it became part of their wider understanding for the sort of childhood experiences, such as Jerry's relationship with his mother, which are now widely understood to be common among many future serial killers. The research Douglas and Ressler did with Jerry and other killers ultimately allowed them to create profiles for multiple active serial killer cases over the years, contributing to the apprehension of countless monsters and, consequently, saving countless lives. Time and time again, we've seen them create shockingly accurate profiles of killers, and their interviews with individuals like Jerry played a large role in allowing them to do that. By 2006, 37 years after his conviction, Jerry was the longest-serving inmate at the Oregon State Penitentiary when he passed away on March 28th from natural causes, having spent years battling with liver cancer. Jerry was never tried for the murder of Linda Slauson. Despite his confession to her murder and photographs found in his garage that seemed to support it, there was not enough conclusive evidence to bring charges. The photographs only showed parts of Linda's body, such as her legs and feet, and could not definitively prove whether they were taken while she was alive or after her death. After hearing the news of his death, Jan Whitney's younger sister told reporters, "As soon as I heard he was dead, I started crying, and it wasn't for him. It was for our family. He put our family through hell. You're never really the same." Detective Stovall, one of the two detectives who oversaw his case, was also quoted as saying about his death, "I'm satisfied he has died. It's just good riddance. He was a true monster, and it's hard to deny that." Jerry was no doubt an incredibly disturbed individual and a true monster. He never showed remorse for his actions and, if anything, seemed proud of what he'd done. Given most of what is known about the fates of his victims comes from his own accounts, it's also unclear if he was involved in any other cases of missing women, with detectives noting at least 12 women had vanished during the time of his killing spree, most of whom have never been found. And with that, our exploration of the Shoe Fetish Slayer case comes to a close. As always, thanks so much for watching. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe and drop a comment down below to let me know your thoughts, and to appease the algorithm gods. It's been increasingly difficult lately for me to get predictable views on YouTube, so if you want to support my channel further, I do have a membership option and a Patreon linked in the description below. Though there's no pressure at all to do so, as I currently can't offer much in the way of perks. But just know, I appreciate all of your support so much, and I'm thankful for every one of you watching my videos and engaging with my channel. Until next time, you have been watching The Mystery Abyss.